Well, now I've screwed it up anyways.
Here we go.
Hello, and welcome to the Hackaday Podcast. I'm Tom Nardi.
And I'm Kristina Panos.
This is episode 285, Learning Laser Tricks, Rocket Science, and a Laptop That's Not a Laptop. Elliot Williams is noticeably absent for this episode. He is taking some time off, I think, before the real pressure for SuperCon starts piling on. He wanted to take a breather. It's funny, we try to stagger time off for obvious reasons, and I took off at the beginning of the month, and I think Al's taking off when Elliot comes back, and I came back from taking a week off, and I said something to Al about, did I miss anything? And he goes, why? Where were you? And I said, I was on vacation. And he goes, really? He's like, he kept on sending emails and posting stuff to Hackaday.io, and it seemed like business as usual. And I was like, well, that's the vacation for me. I do pretty much the same thing I do normally, except I'm not getting paid for it, I guess.
Oh.
Yeah. But Elliot has the right idea. I think he's somewhere where there's no internet service, and he's either going to Boulder or he's going to go look at a boulder somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't remember. One of those. It's gonna be great, whatever he does, I'm sure. So with Elliot gone, we are in charge of the podcast, and we'll do the best that we can.
We're doing our best here.
We try. In Hackaday news, we have 2 weeks-ish, right, of the Tiny Games contest. I think, what did we say? We have like 44 entries at the moment?
As of this recording.
44? There may be more. Hopefully not less by the time you check. Can there be less? I don't know if you can back out, actually. Some really cool stuff. We said it before, but anytime you put these kind of constraints, I think, on hackers, they come out with the cool stuff. So, if we just had to, make games, that would not have been particularly interesting. There had to be something else, right? There has to be like a tiny game, or games with limited buttons or something like that. So it's just cool to see how you can do a surprising amount with very little.
Oh yeah.
Days. I've been looking at some of them. Some of them are not so tiny, guys. I don't know. We might have to
reel it in.
But yeah, we might have to draw a line in the sand here. What is tiny? Did we say what tiny is? Is there actually a size limit? No, right?
I don't think so. Tiny bomb, tiny code.
Okay, fine. So that maybe the big ones have a tiny part count. We'll be watching. Don't think we're not looking carefully at this. I mean, I'm not, but somebody is. Somebody's looking very carefully at this. Maybe it's Kristina.
This is a journey into sound. What's that sound?
What's that sound?
All right, well, now it's the part of the podcast where we do What's That Sound? Last week, apparently, everyone was stumped. It was the startup chime from an SGI Indigo, and nobody guessed it right. I don't know if that might be a first. I'm not sure if we've never had anybody even get close. Before Elliot left, I was given a directive to try to make it easier this week. So Kristina and I went back and forth a couple times, and we came up with this. So we had to cheat a little bit because we picked this together, so obviously we both know it, so we will skip the theatrics of trying to figure out what the sound is. If you know what the sound is, and assuming I can figure out how to make a Google form, you'll check out the show notes and give us your best guess for a chance to win a Hackaday Podcast t-shirt.
All right. Not even we have those, so you'll be super special.
Well, for my first hack this week, I had to pick this one. I wrote it up. I liked it so much. This is open source liquid rocket reaches for the sky. And this is just an awesome project from Half Cat Rocketry to create not just an open source liquid fueled rocket, but a liquid fueled rocket that's actually designed to be replicated and, you know, modified and changed, right? 'Cause it's one thing to make some crazy, super complex design, put the CAD files out there and say, hey, you know, it's open source, good luck. This was actually made with that community in mind. This isn't just, you know, open source as a buzzword. It's open source as, hey, like, let's work together and build something cool. And it's rocket science, right? So, like, if you know anything about rocketry, liquid-fueled rockets are about the hardest thing you could do. I mean, they operate on, like, the very edge of physics and material science. And if you look at amateur rocketry, and you're talking everything from, you know, the SC's rocket at the toy store to, you know, amateur rockets that have actually reached space, they're almost, I won't say 100%, but almost always are solid propellant. Just gets so much easier. You take the fuel and you have a binder and you cast it into a cylinder and you lay it off, and the rest sort of takes care of itself. To do a liquid rocket is monstrously difficult in comparison. So just the fact that they were able to build the thing is impressive on its own, but that they've made it so accessible is maybe stretching the word. But, you know, when you're talking about something that you can build for less than 2,000 US, that's pretty impressive to be able to distill such a complex thing down to the bare minimum. The documentation on this, again, you know, it's rocket science, right? So, like, you really need to cross all the T's and dot the I's. So the documentation is phenomenal. The in addition to all the CAD stuff being released as open source, there's this guidebook that's 370 odd pages, I think, that goes over everything in just exquisite detail, from the theory of operation to what I thought one of the coolest things is there's actually like a maintenance chart at the back, because, you know, it is intended as a reusable rocket. So it says, like, okay, every X amount of launches, you're going to want to tighten this bolt and you're going to want to check this seal, so that, you know, they really did their homework. It's a project where, when I was writing it up, every time I would think I was done, I'd be like, oh yeah, but I want to mention this. I want to mention this. I mean, there's just so much cool stuff, especially for a rocket nerd like myself. This is about as cool as it gets for DIY rocketry. And, you know, I'm still never going to build one. you know, as much as I'd like to. It's the bar is still a little bit too high. But there are people out there who will, right? And having this information out there, it's going to inspire other groups, whether they're student groups or just, you know, a couple of rocket nerds in the garage. You know, I'm really excited to see what this inspires, whether it's, you know, 1-to-1 copies or just, you know, you could just say, hey, you know, I don't have anywhere to fly a rocket, you know, that's not, you know, so you might say, hey, I just want to build the engine, you know, and that's fine too. Like, you could do it kind of piecemeal. So I think, you know, we might see that, people just saying, hey, let me recreate the engine in the backyard just so I can say I made a rocket engine in the backyard. I mean, that itself would be really cool. So awesome project here. This is, you know, result of years of work and research and development. And this is the kind of open source development that really gets me excited. You know, stuff that used to be a black box secret is now out there for anybody anybody with, you know, sufficient equipment and funds to tackle on their own.
That's super cool, and I think you should build one, but I don't I don't know what I'm talking about, so don't listen to me.
If there was one takeaway for this, generally speaking, for a liquid fuel rocket, you have pumps and turbines and all kinds of crazy stuff to get the fuel and oxidizers out of the tank and mixed, and that's where so much of the complexity comes from. And maybe you could say all the complexity really comes from moving liquids in incredible volumes at incredible speeds. And in this design, they managed to do away with that entirely, which is wild. And the kind of the idea here is there's a single tank with a piston that moves in the middle, and on one side you have your oxidizer, which is nitrous oxide, and then your fuel goes on the other. And the idea is that the nitrous oxide is at such a high pressure that it pressurizes itself. Like, it wants to come out of the tank as soon as you open the valve. But that pressure of the nitrous oxide actually pushes the piston into the fuel side. So it pressurizes both at the same time without the need for any pumps or like a third pressurization gas like helium or something. It's a really wild design. I mean, there's some trickiness in getting the piston sealed right so that they don't mix, but comparatively, right, that's easy.
For my first hack, I chose Shelton Maker's laser art inspired by the Ford Motor Company. Now, what that means is Fordite. And how have I never heard of Fordite? If you've never heard of Fordite, it's made from layers of car paint that would build up on the rails at the factory. And when it got thick enough, the workers would cut it off and polish it up and use it to make jewelry pieces. Well, Shelton Maker took the same approach to building up a canvas of paint on which to laser engrave a version of Starry Night. And although the layered colors of Fordite are random, Shelton Maker's layers are more intentional in going from lightest to darkest. Then the laser cuts at different depths to achieve the desired color or lightness. But in order to actually do this on the laser cutter, Shelton Maker started by uploading a grayscale image to a program called Image R, which creates a negative. Apparently it was tricky to get the power settings just right, so Shelton Maker started at a lower power and then went even lower as they made passes. This also reminds me a bit of coloring all over a page and then covering that with black crayon and then scratching through the blackness with the point of your compass. Did you ever do that? I guess they came up with like commercial versions of this later where you didn't have to do all this. You just got it.
Oh, yeah.
And there was colors underneath.
Right, it's like...
I think Crazy Art made them.
Yeah, like it's a black sheet and then you scrape it and there's like the different colors underneath there.
Yeah. Back in the olden days, we used to make those ourselves.
In the snow, uphill?
Yes. Both ways. So yeah, I thought this was really cool, and then I immediately wanted some Fordite, and I started looking for some on eBay, and it's not that expensive unless you want uncut, unpolished. You can get like pounds of it for like $100.
I suppose not surprising for industrial waste, right?
Yeah.
You can't ask for too much. Like, here's some hazardous waste that we collected, and convinced you it's artistic. No, I think this is a really cool technique. This reminds me of stuff we've seen where like people will do a control panel. You'll spray white on say like a piece of acrylic and then spray it black, laser off the black.
Oh yeah.
Whereas the white, right, in theory, won't laser off, or at least not the same power because it's it's reflective compared to the black. We're starting to see, more lasers out there just in general, and that in turn is getting people creative and getting people thinking about different techniques like this. To me, it's always been kind of like how 3D printers went from something only a handful of people had, and it was kind of like this arcane knowledge, to, you go on Amazon and $200, and lasers have kind of largely hit that same price point too. Really, if you're talking about like a diode laser anyway, it doesn't cost a whole lot to get involved. So it's great to see these tools in more people's hands, and the kind of stuff that is a specific. You wouldn't need to do this for anything else, right? Like, why else would you make art this way unless I have a thing that can cook off layers based on their color, and how can I make that into art? Well, my next one is learning how a nuclear missile stays on target. That's quite a title, right? I always get a little apprehensive about the posts that are about weapons and military stuff. But I mean, the reality is so much of our technology that we kind of take for granted came, at least in some part, from military research and that kind of thing. So, I mean, you're listening to this over the internet, and I got bad news for you about who created the internet, right? But anyway, this is Ken Sharif, who always does an amazing job taking apart stuff, and we've covered so much his kind of teardowns. And this is looking into a Minuteman nuclear missile, which introduced in the 60s, and if I'm correct, was still not operational because it hasn't been World War III yet, but at least it was ready to be deployed as late as the 2000s. Kind of the hook here is that, again, it was made in the 60s, so like you didn't have GPS and you didn't have these super powerful computers. It was not that sending a missile from one side of the planet to the other would be easy today, but it was a hell of a lot harder back then. So there is a lot of unique engineering that went into this. The missile had to be able to effectively guide itself, all inertial navigation, because there was nothing. There was no satellite network for it to check with, and the idea of in the 60s trying to do like optical recognition. I feel like modern cruise missiles and stuff can like look around on the ground and look for waypoints, but you couldn't do that back then. So it all had to just be gyros and measurements of movement and all kept internal, which made for a very packed avionics section in these missiles that he takes apart, and with his usual sprinkling of labels and diagrams and color coding. I mean, like, if you haven't seen the kind of stuff that Ken does, like, you're definitely missing out. There's a lot of cool details in here. To me, I think one of the, it makes sense once you read about it, but it didn't occur to me, is that, because these missiles had to kind of navigate on their own, and they couldn't really, get any kind of data from their surroundings so much, the initial pointing of them at launch was super, super important. You had to rotate the whole missile in the silo so that it was pointed at, well, the Soviet Union, presumably, and any deviation in that initial pointing would get magnified over the flight, right? So like it was super, super critical that you got it exactly pointed, and there was a whole system of objects around the silo, like concrete fixtures that they could point at, and they knew, the degrees and all that kind of stuff to get that initial heading right. And it does talk about how that was a lot of work went into that, like a lot of measurements and region measurements to make sure, okay, this is exactly pointed where it needs to be, because once you let it off the chain, it's going to follow a trajectory, and if you didn't get the start point right, you're not going to get the end point right. So, yeah, just a lot of technology involved in blowing other people up, sadly. Luckily, no one was ever on the receiving end of one of these, and I can only imagine what its modern replacement would be. One detail I did really like in here is that at some point in the development of the missile, there was like the first generation computer that was then replaced with the later one, right? As this thing was in operation for decades. So surplus first generation computers that they had made, they actually were able to then like donate those to schools and businesses and stuff to use them as just like a general purpose computer. This is the early 70s, and who would turn down a free computer, right? Even though it was like a weird computer out of the nose cone of a nuclear equipped ICBM, like, yeah, I'll take it, so Ken mentions everyone from like Harvard to the Center for Disease Control took one of these little missile computers back and figured out how to program them and used them as just general purpose computers for a while.
That's crazy.
Like, I'd be happy if somebody gave me a missile computer.
I
certainly wouldn't turn it down. I wouldn't even ask any questions. I'd be like, just leave it on the doorstep. I didn't see anything.
And forget my address.
He even links in the write-up that enough of these like surplus missile computers went out to different, like I said, like to different schools and universities and stuff. So they actually started like a user group, and there would be these occasional meetings of groups that had received one of these computers, and they would compare notes and be like, well, how'd you get it to do, and in the there's a PDF here of one of their proceedings from 72, and it has the list of members, and I mean, it is definitely a who's who of like, Drexel University, Duke University, Florida State, Arizona State, McDonnell Douglas. A lot of people were happy to have their missile computers. Where are they now, I wonder?
All right. For my next hack, I chose 357 Magdads fighting the Scourge of Screwdriver Mange. Now, before this video, 357 Magdad was able to save a few with a labor-intensive multi-step process, but decided to try 4 viewer-suggested methods for removing this crud off of the plastic of screwdriver handles. And yeah, those are my favorite too, the clear ones, the candy ones. Either the ones with the painted panels or just the candy handled ones. I have a set that I've had since college that are yellow and black, and the yellow is clear. They're great. Anyway, so the polymer in these handles is cellulose acetate butyrate, or CAB, which is kind of the same stuff that's in pool balls and movie film, but it's a little different. Anyway, so the 4 viewer suggested methods were acetone, ammonia, a mix of bleach and hot water, and then distilled white vinegar. So the acetone dip didn't seem to do anything. So 357 Magdad set it aside and moved on to cure number 2, which was ammonia. And while there was no obvious reaction right away, some flakes started to appear after a short while. And he left it sitting for 2 minutes and then wiped it off, and reports that it turned into a paste. And you can see it come off. It comes off great. It comes off beautifully with the ammonia. And even though the ammonia seemed to work great, 357 Magdad moved on to cure number 3, which was letting the handle soak in a 50-50 solution of hot water and bleach for 1 hour. And that didn't work at all, so he tried cure number 4, soaking it overnight in distilled white vinegar, which did absolutely nothing. In the roundup at the end, it seems the acetone did eventually eat away at the mange, but it doesn't look like it did as good of a job as the ammonia, which worked really well and really quickly. So keep that in mind if your screwdrivers grow this mange. Ammonia is your friend.
Rarely is that the case. I think that ammonia is your friend, but at least at least this time. Generally speaking, stay clear of ammonia. But
yes,
I gotta say, I don't think I'd ever seen this particular affliction until this post came out.
I haven't either.
I gotta be real. I probably would have just thrown them away because they look disgusting.
Yeah,
I don't know that I would have spent so much time trying to clean them up, especially where at one point apparently the concoction smells like vomit during the process. That might have been where I just kind of cut my losses. Like, you know what, you had a good life screwdriver, but now it's time. Now it's time for the garbage. But no, like the process kind of reminded me of, and I'm surprised when Dan did the write up, he didn't mention it actually, like the retro bright that is put on, old computers to, I don't know if it reverses the process or just takes the coloring off or whatever, but it's a similar thing where there's like a UV light and you got to put the stuff on there, and my understanding from that is that it's like a fire retardant that they had put in the plastic that just changes color. Like, when they were making these things, who thought in 40 odd years people would still be worried about it, right? So it was just kind of an unexpected long-term effect of the stuff they put in there. And I guess it's a similar thing for the screwdrivers, right? You're just cranking out screwdrivers and you're like, who's going to be restoring screwdrivers in the future? But it takes all types in this community, and yeah, like I said, I wouldn't do it, but I fully understand that there are people out there who probably have like their favorite screwdriver that they've taken apart many memorable devices with, and don't want it to pass on to that maker space in the sky too early. So if you're out there and you were willing to do this kind of stuff, leave us a comment, because I'm kind of curious how many people out there are that attached to their tools. All right, well, this is my last one, and I got to say, I feel kind of bad for putting this at the tail end, but it is very early research and maybe grain of salt kind of stuff, but interesting enough to talk about. Jenny List wrote this one up, and it says, "Wow, it wasn't aliens after all." And this is, of course, referencing the WOW signal from Ohio State's University Big Ear Telescope, which was basically a signal that was received, and it was so strong that they circled it on the printout and literally wrote "wow" next to it. When you see this crazy strong signal from deep space, your imagination runs wild, right? And you hope that it's some civilization out there saying hello. And there's been attempts to try to figure out what it was. Obviously, it only happened the one time, and pointed radio telescopes at that point in space again, and they didn't get anything. And there's been debate for decades about what it was. Now, the Planetary Habitability Laboratory at the University of Puerto Rico at Arecibo has provided what they think is an explanation or a potential explanation for the WOW signal. And you may recall that the Arecibo radio telescope is no more,
Yes.
very, very sadly. But there still is all the data collected over the decades, so they're able to still go back and look through all of its readings and try to find new correlations in the data, and we'll still be pouring over the information collected by the telescope for years to come, even though it is sadly no longer with us physically. Anyway, so they went back and they were looking for similar kind of things, and they have come up with the theory that the WOW signal could have been a cloud of hydrogen gas that was excited by a magnetar. And a magnetar is a type of like a neutron star that creates a insanely difficult for a human mind to comprehend magnetic field. I've read something, if you could get to a magnetar, you would be dead 1,000 kilometers out because your atoms would have been ripped to shreds thanks to the magnetic field. Like it's a magnetic field beyond anything we can, compare here. It's the most magnetic thing in the known universe. So the idea is that if a burst from one of these hit the hydrogen cloud, it would have excited it. And the paper actually refers to it as a maser type event. And, of course, a maser is the radio frequency variant of a laser. It's the same concept as a laser, where you excite something to the point it shoots out a beam, except instead of a visible light beam, this is in the radio. So they're basically saying that a natural laser of sorts was created, and Earth just happened to be looking down the barrel of it at the right time to get a blast, and that would explain why it hasn't happened since, and it would explain the very high signal strength from it. And they actually say that looking through the Arecibo data, they think they've found similar, although not nearly as strong, hits from one of these, natural masers. You should probably say that, the paper is not peer-reviewed yet. It's still kind of a work in progress, and it's one of those things that's probably unprovable in any way, because it happened once, and you have one data point, and we can only kind of speculate at what really happened. It could have been somebody microwaving a burrito or whatever. It's an interesting theory, and they also point out that because they've identified similar energetic outbursts in the Arecibo data, that this might be a kind of a false positive that we need to keep an eye out for when looking for potential, signals from whatever. If you're looking for extraterrestrial life, don't get fooled by this one, because it's probably just another space laser.
Space lasers.
Those damn space lasers. I hate when I get hit with a space laser.
For my last regular hack, I chose Ominous Industries, a trackball retro laptop. Now, Navarre isn't kidding in his write-up. Retro portables really are having a moment, it seems, at least among the Hackaday pages. And Ominous Industries' trackball retro laptop is no exception. The first coolest part of this thing is that it clips onto the side of the laptop. And in order to create this thing, Ominous Industries started with the guts of a small USB trackball and created an enclosure in Fusion 360. I love that Ominous was able to mimic the texture onto the trackball enclosure as well. And I would totally be absent-mindedly running my finger along that all day long, probably. I don't know about you. But I also love the flexures in the enclosure that actuate the buttons underneath. We love flexures around here. Yay, flexures. Isn't this thing great?
It's also. I mean, I love these faux classic builds, and they definitely are becoming more common. Not that I'm complaining, right? I think it's cool, and it's also kind of like a but very related thing to like the cyber decks.
Oh yeah,
right. Like I mean, who's to say? I guess other than maybe Gibson, what is and isn't a cyber deck, but to me, they're clearly laptops. They're the shape of a laptop, albeit an old school laptop. But it's the same kind of thing where there's a desire to build a very personal machine, right? And Is it better than the laptop from the big box store? Probably not, but it's yours, and you made it exactly the way you wanted it, and because of that, it's easier to fix, and I think it really clicks with our community. Plus, they look cool. Everybody's got a laptop, right? All laptops kind of look the same. They might be different colors, and they have somebody else's logo on the front, but if you've seen one laptop, you've seen them all. So, I definitely got a lot of respect for the people who want to make their own thing, and it's kind of a shame they all have to have these weird little screens. A lot of these using these like ultra wide screens, which are cool, but what's it like 3 inches tall? Like 9x3. I mean, like, okay. I mean,
Yeah.
it's usable.
It's like a Neo.
Yeah, it's right. You get a few lines of text on there. You'd imagine trying to, I don't know, read Hackaday on such a display. So it would be cool if there was maybe a little more practical displays out there. I guess that aren't as big as, because you could reuse laptop displays, but they're all going to be a lot bigger than I think that we tend to see on these. And probably the size is more limited by the 3D printer bed than anything else, right? Like the reason these things are all roughly the same size is because that's how big your standard i3 style 3D printer can do. But hey, there's still a lot of variation within those limits. Well, my first quick hack is, are you using your calipers wrong? From Al Williams. And after watching the video, I can confidently say that I am not using them fully wrong, so I feel a little bit better about that. And I wager that probably most of the Hackaday readership is not using them wrong. But there are maybe some things you didn't know that you could do, or there's some little details in the calipers that have escaped your notice. And if you're a beginner and you've never used calipers before and you want to know what all the fuss is about, this is probably a good video to watch, just to show you the do's and the don'ts and best practices kind of thing. Next up is building a paper tape reader to read bytes. Maya Posh wrote this one up. This one comes from Usagi Electric, David Lovett. If you're familiar with his stuff, he's always bringing old big iron computers back to life, and in the process, he wanted a tape reader to read some tape, but of course, it had to be era appropriate. People in the comments said, "Oh, well, why didn't you just use some LEDs, or why didn't you use a microcontroller?" Well, that would kind of take the fun out of it, right? If you're trying to build a tape reader for this ancient machine, you got to do ancient parts. So David uses some photodetector tubes and a bunch of passive components, and is able to read them optically, but using pretty era appropriate stuff for the 1950s. I mean, the resistors would have been bigger, and the breadboard would have been, maybe made out of masonite or something, but otherwise, this is pretty much what a homebrew tape reader probably would have looked like at the time. And then this last one, it's not a hack. Maybe it's even bordering on an advertisement, but I thought it was something interesting I wanted to bring up. This was Atari announces the Atari 7800 Plus nostalgia console. This is the latest in a line of small-ish game consoles that like Nintendo and Sony and now Atari have been putting out. If you can't come up with something new, just take the old thing and make it slightly different. So in Atari's case, rather than making it a mini system like Nintendo and Sony did, there's our 80% scale, because why not, right? That's a nice arbitrary number. It's an 80% scale Atari 7800, but of course inside is a little rock chip Linux computer running probably, an open source emulator. So there is a certain degree of, hackability here that we'll certainly keep an eye on. The funny thing to me is that it's 7800, so it can play the 2600 games, and I should say it can play the actual physical real games if you still have them hanging around. But just last year, Atari came out with a 2600 re-release So you got to wonder if if you bought the re-release 2600 last year, are you kicking yourself because now the 7800 is available? But of course, sans plastic wood grain on the front, so that's something to consider.
For my first quick hack, I chose Luke J. Barker's Save the Stranded Puppies of Moonbase P. This is an entry into our Tiny Games contest. And this awesome little game marries up Lunar Lander with Flappy Bird. Basically, you move your lander above and across the moon terrain, dodging mountains and meteors, both until you reach those poor puppies that are stranded at Moonbase P. Load up those puppies and take them to the rescue pod, and you win. This thing uses a Xiao ESP32C3 and an OLED the size of a US $quarter. And it's very cute. And the screen is one of those displays that's yellow, permanently yellow across the top, and then the rest of it's blue. And I think it's a really good use of that. Next up is Zung92's Help the Lego Camera Become a Reality. You did it! You all helped the Lego Camera become a reality because it already has reached 10,000 votes of support on the Lego Ideas site, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway. We covered this back in March 2023 when it was first put on the Ideas site. This is a fully functional camera that's built entirely out of Lego, even the lens. You'll have to put real 35mm film into it, of course. But be sure to check out the very cool manual. And lastly, Senile Data Systems coming at you with zero-dimensional Pong. This is another great entry into our 2024 Tiny Games contest. You've no doubt heard of one-dimensional Pong. This takes that and turns it on the short side, so all you see is an LED coming toward and moving away from you. And this, of course, is done with pulse width modulation. Senile Data Systems chose a green and red LED. So when it's fully green, that's when you're supposed to hit the one button, and when it's fully red, that's when you're supposed to hit the other button. Although, they used a socket, so you can change the LED if you want to, and that's really cool.
Quick hacks.
All right, well, finally, we've come to the part of the podcast where we look at can't-miss long-form articles from our team of incredible Hackaday writers. And my pick for this week is This Is Not a Laptop, It's a KVM from Donald Papp. And I really like this one because I saw when the company emailed us. We get emails every day about, review our thing. And 98% of them we just ignore. We're not like a review site, but occasionally something unique enough comes along. They're like, all right, fine, we'll look at it. And I gotta be honest with you, I didn't think this necessarily met that bar when it came through, but apparently Donald did, and he took him up on this. It's the Crowview? No, really, Crowview? Like, oh, all right, okay, it's the Crowview. No, all right. They just make these names up. And it looks exactly like a laptop. Like, exactly like a laptop. Like, if you asked 1,000 people, 1,000 people would tell you this is a laptop. In fact, when I saw it in the email, I said, why are they trying to send us a laptop? I don't get it. But it's not a laptop. That would be too easy. It is probably a laptop display. I mean, I guess it has to be, right? It's full size 14-inch, so they got that off the market somewhere, and it's a laptop keyboard, and it's a laptop trackpad, and it's in a enclosure that one may describe as being very laptop-ish. But what it's missing is any sort of computing capability. Ultimately, what this is just a keyboard and a display in a folding form that you're supposed to plug into something. And I gotta be real, I just didn't get it at first. It didn't seem to make any sense to me, because what they're telling you to do is you plug your Raspberry Pi or I guess any kind of single board computer, right, into the side of this thing. So you have what looks for all the world like a normal laptop, and off to the side is just the Raspberry Pi holding on for dear life, just waiting to be broken off. Like, I don't know that I've ever seen something that looked so obviously like I'm going to break this immediately. Like nothing holds it, as far as I can tell, other than just the USB-C, connector and the HDMI. It's a very bold design. I'll say that. And Donald takes it for a spin, and it works. It does what you think it would do. You hook up to a Raspberry Pi, you get video, you get keyboard. This display looks good. I mean, it's all that stuff is fine. It's just that there's like, it seems so weird that they just wouldn't put a space inside the thing to put the Raspberry Pi. That would make a lot more sense if it even in the comments somebody says, why not? Okay, if the Pi itself is too big, how come you didn't do it like the compute module? Like, this would be so cool if you could. There was like a little hatch on the back. You put the compute module in there, and I mean, the thing even has batteries. It has batteries, but it doesn't have a computer in it. It's very strange. So I guess I didn't get it at all, but reading this article, Donald does make a pretty interesting case that I didn't consider, and I'm kind of coming around now, in that, okay, you have a keyboard, you have a display, you got all that stuff in this very handy foldable form factor. Like, oh, they should make computers like this. And you could plug it in to whatever, because it just has HDMI and USB ports on the side. So he's kind of making the case like, hey, this would be cool to put on the workbench. And if you have, some headless little server you're messing with, you can plug it into that. If you got, some computer you picked up off the curb, right? You picked it off. Does it work? I don't know. You plug it in, you start this thing. You don't have to drag a monitor out, I can kind of see that. I sort of see that as, I guess in the professional world, they call it like a crash cart for like a server room, where you'd be able to bring your monitor and keyboard over to something that doesn't usually have a monitor and keyboard, plug it in real quick and see what's going on. I can kind of see that, and that's a pretty cool application, and certainly in our circles where there's a lot of poking around with, headless devices and stuff, I can kind of I can see the utility. The only thing that kind of bums me out is that, Donald kind of goes in that direction. Says, okay, let's say I'm going to use it as like this, ad hoc. I need a keyboard, I need a monitor kind of thing. There's some weird quirks in it that maybe keep that from being as useful as you'd hope. Like, for example, he says that the keyboard and the monitor are not separate entities as you might expect them to be, and that they have to work together. He says, like, if there's no video signal coming in, the keyboard doesn't work, even though you would think the keyboard would just be a normal USB keyboard. I don't know how you mess that up, that the keyboard is somehow dependent on the video signal. Also, he says that for whatever reason, by default, all the function keys are for controlling like the display, like the color and the brightness and stuff. So if you actually want to send like F1 to the connected computer, you have to hit function F1, which seems, the opposite of what you'd want. And he kind of closes it with, it would be a cool tool to have around for those times where you need a keyboard and display, if it wasn't so weird that, like, you can't be guaranteed it's actually working. To go back to this, like, say if you got a computer off the side of the road and you don't know if it works, you plug it into this thing. Like, if you hadn't cast the proper incantations, like, maybe it wouldn't work either. So you wouldn't. Now you got two things that don't work. So I don't know. He does mention it's it's an early version, so maybe some of these bugs will be worked out. It is a crowdfunding thing that's as of right now is at 144,000 of their original $10,000 goal. So I think they'll be okay. I don't know. Donald did a pretty good job of selling me on this thing, so I'm kind of interested. I'm curious. He talks about like again, it's 98% of a laptop, right? You just need to add the computer part. So like it does. We were just talking not long ago about people doing, custom computers and that sort of thing. Maybe this is like the path of least resistance. You get one of these things and you somehow shove a Raspberry Pi in. There's got to be some free space in there somewhere, right? Like maybe you just shove something inside of it and you make your own laptop that, instead of looking like a 3D printed thing, looks like a proper commercial laptop but has your own internals. So maybe that's something that we'll see happen. I'm certainly interested to see these things hit the wild. They're talking about shipping November of this year. So perhaps for Christmas you'll have one of these under the tree and you can make something cool with it.
So you came around.
I think so. I think I kind of came around. He made a good case for it.
You wouldn't turn down one for free.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, I did. I don't know. I guess I could kind of see it like sitting on a shelf and like, oh man, I want to hook up a. I've had that happen, like I got Raspberry Pis, a couple of them like doing something, and they're just kind of sitting there power, and occasionally they no longer do the something they're supposed to do, and I usually and man, was it Donald that wrote that up too? I got one of those like little cheap USB capture cards that let you hook up an HDMI device to it, and I'll do that, instead of having like I don't just have monitors necessarily laying around, right? So I'll hook it up to that, and then I can open a window on the computer and see the output. But that's got its own issues. So having a little portable display would be cool, but reading that, it doesn't always work the way you expected it to, and added weirdness of using USB-C video. So I might be better suited with just one of those little portable HDMI monitors tucked away for emergency use.
For my can't miss, I chose Al Williams's laser cutters. Where's the point? And what Al means is, it's important to know exactly where the engraving point is, or things will be noticeably off. Now, your really fancy laser engraver setups will probably have a camera, but what if your laser engraver doesn't come with one, like the X-Tool S1 that Al got to try out recently? Then what do? Well, according to Al, you take a trip to the dollar store, or if you're me, the basement, and you get some wrapping paper. Doesn't matter what it looks like, because you're going to use the back of it. In the example, Al wants to engrave the front of a leather notebook. He'll use an outline representing the book, much like you might 3D print a representation of a PCB to make sure it fits in your enclosure. So basically, what you do is tape down the wrapping paper to the bed, turn on outline only, and burn that into the paper. Then you put your book on the outline, refocus the laser, and get to burning. And Al points out that if you must have a camera, the X-Tool S1 can kind of do that. It involves putting calibration dot stickers on the bed and then finding those with the laser. Then you take a picture of the bed with your phone and connect it to your computer via QR code. Once that's set up, it sends automatically, but it's not a live feed. So you have to keep shooting and fixing things and shooting and fixing things until everything's good, and then don't move anything, and you're golden.
I like this one. I've been playing around with the laser, and it is tricky. Perhaps one of the trickiest things actually is getting that initial alignment. Obviously, you want to do it right. You want it to look cool. You don't want, like, if you're going to put your logo or something on there, you don't want it to be all cockeyed or off center. And, the laser is quite unforgiving. Like, there's no undo, right? Like, once it's on there, it's on there. So, and you may have one shot. It's totally possible if somebody's like, hey, can you put something on this special notebook my mother gave to me on her deathbed? You don't want to screw that up. You want it needs to be right, and there needs to be no room for error. And that is a lot harder than you might think. And I'll say, even, you mentioned that not all of them have cameras. I would go as far as to say, even if it has a camera, it doesn't necessarily mean it works properly, because I did the review for whatever. I'll put it in the show notes. I forget. It's random combination of syllables and numbers that make up its name escapes me at the moment. It, Yum Fire 4 or whatever it was. It had a camera, but the camera only worked using its absolutely garbage proprietary Windows software, so it might as well not have been there for me, right? I could never. I tried to get an image out of it, and I actually never could. To be fair, I actually got a Windows machine, put their horrendous software on it, and still couldn't get it to work. So just because it says on the box that has a camera, don't be fooled. That might not do you any good. So what I've done in the past is put the thing in there, and then like if you're using Lightburn, you can say, okay, we'll set the output to like 2% and just let it ride, and then you can move the laser around. So like one thing I did for my parents, I engraved a logo on coasters, right, like slate coasters, and obviously you want to be square, you want to be in the middle of it. So like I'd put the coaster in there, and I would move it. The laser and you'd have this little dim laser point because at like I said, like 2 or 3% power, and you could like put that on the four corners of the coaster, and in that way, know you were there. But it's finicky and it takes a little experimentation. I like this approach that Al's talking about, where you cut it out, you have an outline, and then you could drop the thing right into the outline. And I should say, if this is something you're going to do a lot of, if you're, I don't know, making some little thing, it would probably make sense to just make a jig. I've seen people do that. Like if you're doing, say, a bunch of dog tags or something, you could 3D print a jig that holds them all in exactly the right place, and then you can like make a Lightburn template thing and that kind of stuff. But for like a one-off, I definitely see the appeal of doing something, doesn't get much cheaper than wrapping paper, and just throwing it down there and seeing where it's going to lie. And again, this is, like I said before, more people are getting lasers, and more people are learning the unique challenges therein and coming up with solutions. So that's a twofer. That's two things we're seeing that would have been 5 years ago. It wouldn't. The last thing I would have been worried about is, how do I accurately laser something onto a notebook? And now here we are. Well, that's it for this week's episode of the Hackaday Podcast. As always, thanks for listening. If you see anything cool, or you do anything cool, or if you're cool and want to talk to other cool people, you can email us at tips@hackaday.com. The show notes for this episode and all the episodes are also up on the website. And until next time,
keep on hacking. What's that sound? That was my microphone and me hitting it.
Nah, forget about it. I'm not gonna lie to these people.
Oh, the things people will do to clothe themselves.
I mean, it's probably killing me, but at least the calories are low.
Sorry, I'm telling my cat to shut up.